Today's talk is inspired by the idea of a knock-knock joke. I'm gonna play both parts, of course. Knock, knock. Who's there? Painful. You can say that, but you won't know the punchline. Okay. Knock, knock. Who's there? God. God, how do I know it's you? Ah, that's why. How do I know it's you? Do we often know that when we are praying for this divine inspiration, for decision making, for all kinds of areas in our life, that it really is the voice of God? Or is it maybe our mind chatter giving us information? How do I know the difference? I hear this from a lot of people, and I myself have been through that. So, how do I make a decision I am about to make? How do I know that it's the right decision? How do I know that the direction I'm about to veer off in is the right direction? How do I know? How do I know? We ask ourselves this so many times. How do I know this is really my intuition, the voice of God? In Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes tells us, over and over again, there is something within us that knows. It knows that it knows. The Bible tells us that the Father knoweth what things you have need of even before you ask. Even before the prayer is answered, it's prayed, the solution is present. Even before we pray, there is already a solution. But we have to believe, we have to trust that before the question is asked, that it is answered correctly. And those are wonderful, comforting words. But how do we know the answer that we think we are hearing is the right answer? Do we really trust that? How do we know that the solution that seems to appear is the right solution? So we search for a way. We're always searching for a way to really hear God or Spirit. We're searching for a way to get that guidance. One way might be to ask for a sign. How many of us have done that? I still do it. I still do it. Give me a sign. But it's illustrated in the book by Dan Wakefield. How do we know when it's God? A woman's been going out with the same man for several years, but doesn't know if he's the right one. She prays for a sign from God. One day she's sitting on the floor in her living room, and the sun is shining through the window. And it falls on the carpet, and it seems to make a letter, form a letter, with the first letter in the name of the man she's trying to decide to marry. Is that God? Is that God? Is that the sign? Or is it simply the sun coming in the window and falling in that pattern? We have to learn to trust and we're going to find out later what's there's a big way to learn if it's the sign, if it's coming from the divine, or if it's coming from our own ego mind. And another way that we seek is to look at things logically. A man wonders if he ought to take a job, a new job that's going to be paying a whole lot more money, but it's in a town far away. He would have to leave all of his friends and his family and the town that he absolutely loves. So he makes a list of pros and cons, totaling up. This side has more pros, this side has less, this side has more cons, whichever it is. And then you take each one of those, and this is not me, I'm not all that logical, but there's, people do this. They make it with Ben Franklin approach to things, through weight, but it's like each thing that you put in the pro and each thing you put in the con has a different weight value. It's more important. So what do? Give it a number and then add it all up. It's all a way of logically making a decision. But is it following divine guidance? Or we seek the advice of friends and counselors and ministers and practitioners, anyone who would listen to help us come to the right decision. Do you see yourself in any of those statements at all? Yeah, a few of us do. We all wrestle with the question, what is the right thing to do? What is the correct decision to make? Despite the assurances that we are given by Holmes and in the Bible and from other sacred writings, we still search. We pray, we meditate, we look for signs, we apply logic. So we seek advice from anyone that we can. And still we don't know. How can we be sure? If only God would speak to us directly in a booming voice and just tell us what to do. That would make everything so much easier, right? Yes. Even though the booming voice of God sometimes isn't enough for some people. Like the hiker who was hiking down the steep and narrow trails and switchbacks of the Grand Canyon, who lost his footing and fell off the side. Tumbling through the air, he grabbed onto a bush. With his arms, he just grabbed onto this bush. And he hung on for dear life because below was 500 feet and lots of rocks on the bottom. And he looked up and he hollered, "Is there anyone up there who can help me?" A great voice boomed down, "Yes, son. I can help you. I am that I am." Stunned to hear the voice, the hiker cried, "God, is that you?" "Yes, my son, it is I," replied the voice. Relieved beyond belief to be hearing directly from God, the hiker asks, "Could you please tell me what to do? What should I do in this situation right here and right now?" And the voice replied, "Just let go." The hiker looked down again at that distance and those rocks, and he looked up again and he asked, "Is there anyone else that I could talk to?" What we are looking for is the kind of guidance and wisdom from God or Spirit that theology calls discernment. And if you saw it in yourself in any of those examples I gave, you might take comfort in knowing that many people throughout all the ages have felt the same way and have prayed deeply on it. Religious leaders and even saints have spent most of their lives trying to learn not only how to do it themselves, but how to teach others to know the voice of God. In his book, How Do We Know When It's God?, Dan Wakefield relates the story of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. He lived in the early 1500s, and he founded the Order of the Jesuits. He is considered by many to be the greatest authority on discernment in the Christian tradition. He even wrote a book on it called Rules of Discernment of Spirits. And yet, he had difficulty discerning for himself. It is told that he was able to discern daydreams, and that God was leading him into a whole new path, a whole new life and a way of being. And the Madonna came to him in a vision. He still couldn't decide whether to kill a Moor who didn't believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. He could not discern if it was the right thing for him to do to defend the honor of the Madonna. In the argument about the subject, the Moor was so aware of how upset that Ignatius was getting that he wisely scrambled away. While Ignatius became more disturbed and more concerned that he failed in his religious duty. Remember, this is in the 1500s, and he really felt like he was failing in defending the honor of the Madonna. Part of him really wanted to pursue the Moor and to track him down and to stab him with his dagger, but he couldn't quite make that decision. What to do, in other words, luckily for the Moor, it was a blessing for the Moor, but Saint Ignatius let the donkey that he was riding on, the mule that he was riding on, make the decision for him. And it took a path different from the one the Moor was on. So even the experts in how do I talk to God? How do I hear God? How do I know it's God? How do I make this decision? Go through the same things as all of us do. And Dan Wakefield wrote, if it's that hard for St. Ignatius to discern whether to stab a Moor in a theological argument, perhaps those of us looking for signs in patterns of sunlight, lists of pros and cons, asking anyone who will listen, would not feel so hopeless after all. And so the topic for us this morning then is a topic of spiritual discernment. How do we know that we know? And I'm not saying that I have surpassed all the scholars and religious leaders that have given us all kinds of direction on this. But I am inspired by this subject, and I have learned that my best decisions I've ever made defy logic. They defy anything that you could write down on a piece of paper and say, here, these are things that I'm supposed to have. But there is something that is within, that directs, and every time I have listened to that, the most amazing things that I could never plan have taken place. And I know that a lot of you have gone through the same kinds of experiences. So it takes trust. When I asked myself to start on this journey of knowing how to know, the answer that immediately popped into my head, first and foremost, we must have the willingness to listen. First and foremost, we have to have the willingness to listen. There are many people who receive great direction and they don't take it. They don't listen to it. They're going to do it a certain way because they're too large in the head. But we got to drop down into the heart and into the solar plexus. And we really, really need to sit in meditation and develop that relationship with the God of our being, with the God of our understanding. Because that's how we know if it's the correct voice or not. When we have developed a relationship with something that is within us, and we know that's the God spark, that's the divinity that each and every one of us has within us. Before we can hope to have a knowing that our choices are for the highest and best good, before we feel that our actions and activities support a life that is satisfying and joyous, we must first be willing to listen. Willing to listen and spending that time in meditation. A lot of answers come through to us when we're in a silent space like that. They allow us to hear the divine wisdom, however it comes. Because I know throughout the day, you ever do this? Like you have this decision, you just can't make your mind up to do it or not to do it. And something happens. You speak to someone and they say something that sparks something in you. That's part of the prayer being answered. You see something, you were in the middle of a movie and there's a scene in the movie that is so uplifting, you go, that's exactly right. It comes in all different channels. Another thing to realize is that this feeling right, because usually it feels right when you make it, might be uncomfortable. You might feel terrible, but you just know it's right, it's the right thing to do. Because you're stepping out of your comfort zone. So, fear and all that stuff will come in and try to distract us. Usually we feel it in the intelligence of our solar plexus. And you've heard people say over and over again, I just had a gut feeling. My gut told me to do that. I just heard someone say that. It's just a gut thing. It's because the solar plexus has so much intelligence in it. Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes wrote, the spirit within us is God. And only to the degree that we listen to and seek to obey the Spirit shall we really succeed. We must first be willing to listen. To listen, and frankly, many of us aren't always willing. We're not always willing. And to trust that this feeling, it feels right, I think this is right, I'm getting all this indication it's right, and then at the last second not follow that. And that's where a lot of regret comes in life. Many times we let fear rule our thinking. We're afraid to step out of that comfort zone. Holmes talks about that in the Science of Mind book. Fear blocks the most complete givingness of the Spirit to humankind. Fear arises from that mental attitude which limits the possibility and the willingness of Spirit to give us the good we so greatly deserve. He's telling us that. And as I look at my fears this morning, I invite you to kind of look at what's holding you back. What kind of thinking? Talked about this all of last month. What kind of paradigm are you coming from that's limiting you and keeping you stuck? And if you're willing to move past that fear, how can you move towards the willingness? Even baby steps are okay. Sometimes we gotta do small things in order for the big thing to happen. When we look back over life and we've made all those intuitive small steps, and we look back and we see this great big manifestation, and people will say, well, how did you do that? Or how did that happen? And it was all taking those baby steps. One step in front of the other, moving forward. Eric Butterworth, Unity Minister, and the reading today came from Eric Butterworth. Unity Minister and author offers us a technique when guidance is needed. And close your eyes, he says, be still and say softly with assurance, Father, I am listening. Or whatever you feel comfortable with. Spirit, I am listening. Infinite intelligence, I am listening. I am open and I am receptive to hearing and following. We just sit that by ourselves when we're trying to make a decision, and then it will come in the perfect time. It doesn't always happen immediately. About this technique, he wrote, you will find marvelous guidance manifested in you. You will feel a sense of conviction, a sense of assurance, a sense of spontaneity, and you will be led. Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him. As we have a willingness to listen and to trust, and that's a huge one, trusting that that voice is the divine voice. That's when we start moving in the direction that serves our highest and best good. Perhaps in a conversation or an inspiration, perhaps in a great piece of music, all of a sudden. It's never all of a sudden. For me, it's a lot of times in the shower. All of a sudden, I'll get an idea, an inspiration. Always in the shower. And something about the water, I guess, the movement. I don't know. But I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to listen, and then we move. We take the steps. We don't have to step right away. But then we take the action. We start planting that seed that brings about our manifestations. Edward Hershey Richards wrote, "A wise old owl sat on an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we more like that wise old bird?" Here's an "Are we listening?" test, just for you to think about. Are we willing to listen when our focus is on truth, forgiveness, and the desire to remove those old paradigms, blocks that keep us from moving forward? To expand our consciousness? Are we willing to listen? We are not so willing to listen to when we are absorbed by our problems, when we focus on solutions only. Here's the problem. That's me. Here's the problem. Let me find a solution. That's depending on the outside world to give us the solution. We can always find a solution to any problem. But if we want the divine inspiration to move through us, if we want to follow the intuitive voice, it has to come from within. We have to feel it. We have to feel it. And then proceed. Are we willing to listen? Those who are willing to listen are seeking to hear spirit, and those who are not are always looking for solutions. Think about this, though. As you listen to the closing words, which are from Ernest Holmes, as he discusses an individual who had the willingness to listen perhaps more than most people, he wrote this in Science of Mind. Jesus spent much of his time communing with his own soul. For it is through our inner thought that we contact God. To this remarkable man, out of the silence of his own soul, came a direct revelation of his oneness with God. It was revealed infinitely and strongly to him. Back of the conflict of ideas, back of the din of external life and action, back in the innermost recesses of uplifted thought and silent contemplation, this is still Ernest Holmes, there is a voice ever proclaiming, "This is my beloved." Seldom does this voice penetrate the outer world of human experience. Seldom do we allow it to perfectly express through us. We must learn to listen to that voice. Call it conscience, intuition, or what you will. It is still there. No one need to go unguided through life. I love that. No one need to go unguided through life. It's always there for us. We are all divine at the center and are all images of the Most High. So first and foremost, in discerning that voice, to know that what we know is really coming from that divinity within, that knows everything, that is everything, to trust this divine guidance as it presents itself to you. That is the way we learn to commune with the divine and make those decisions that serve our very highest and best good. It is spiritual discernment that we are learning. And it's all about being willing to listen. Are you? So it is.